Hello there, my name is Dan, 24th of January 2024, and today I'm going to be making a video showing you how I secure my two polytunnels that I have here in my garden. So over the last week or so we've had two episodes of relatively windy weather by UK standards. We had wind speeds of up to about 50 miles per hour, which is about 80 kilometers per hour the other night, and last night we also had some quite strong winds once again by UK standards. So of course what is a strong wind varies upon where you are situated, whether you are in a residential area such as here, maybe your polytunnel is in the middle of a big field, maybe up on a mountain, maybe you're in another part of the world, another part of the country where the winds are far in excess of that. But my tunnels I've got here have withstood some quite windy weather by the standards here, so I'm going to show you how mine are secured. So first things first, we're going to be going into this tunnel here, which I put up in the earlier part of last year. I've got another tunnel in the back garden I'll show you in a moment, which I actually put up in March 2017, so nearly 7 years now, and that's withstood a lot more high winds than this one. So we'll look at that later, but let's first go in here and I'll show you how it's secured. So the first thing you can see here is I've got this washing line here tied onto this bench. So this is a door, as you can see, and yes, it has got a little latch on it, but that's not really enough for the strong weather. So what I do is I actually tie the door using this to the door frame, and I've tied it to this bench here to stop it moving, because of course in high winds the door can go in and out and cause damage, which you don't want. Of course that also can allow wind to go in and then to blow the cover off from inside. We don't want that either. So we'll now go into the tunnel and I'll show you how it's secured to the ground. So I'm going to link a load of polytunnel videos in the description box below. I've made quite a few over the years, so you can check those out to get some further knowledge, further watching on the subject of today. So first thing I'm going to do is have a look at any loose clips, I call them clips, any loose bolts, screws, whatever you want to call them. So first thing I've noticed is this here, so let's look closer. So yeah, this bit here has actually come loose at the top and the bottom, so we need to make sure we put these back on. It's good to regularly check them, of course, especially after a period of windy weather, because of course the tunnel's moving about like that and it can loosen your bolts, your butterfly nuts, whatever you want to call them, bolts. So yeah, you want to make sure you're regularly checking your polytunnel. Try and make it at least a monthly thing, more often in windy weather. So I've just picked my bolts up off the floor, so we're just going to quickly put that in there like so. So these are actually, you'd hold this with an Allen key on this side and then you just do this up like this. But I don't have an Allen key with me, so later on I'll come around with the Allen key and tighten it up. But very important that you do this, because a chain is only as strong as the weakest link, and you don't want to allow weak links in your polytunnel, because it's time consuming, costly and incredibly annoying. So what I do actually is I keep some spare bolts, butterfly, doer uppers, very handy, because quite often when things like this happen, you can just go to your little stash of useful equipment to use, because sometimes you, here we are, look, just found that bit, look, that's off the floor, but sometimes you can't find them, they get buried under the mud and you end up finding them a few months later. But it's nice to have your necessary components for construction, reconstruction already on hand if you can. So this polytunnel here, it's a Feel Good UK polytunnel. It has a hinged door, which I very much recommend, as opposed to a zip door, far less likely to occur damage in windy weather, wear and tear, etc. So it's actually held on by this hinge. So you can see that one there, look, and that's what goes on there. And of course, the same down here as well. So it's very good to regularly check that and put it back on if necessary and check it's properly on. So we're going to just pull that over, find our hinges. You have to line up the top and the bottom. Can be a bit awkward, but with a bit of patience and determination, it can be done. There we are. So let's close her up. See, it's still a bit blowy, can't you? And we will look at what's going on in here. So here we are inside the tunnel. Now, I'll just give you a bit of a commentary on how I got this secured to the ground. So we'll start with each of the four corners. Now over here you can see I have this post here. It's a bit of 2x4 just there. Ignore this, this is from a previous project. So you can see this here, this is a post, a treated post that I have sunk into the ground, probably about 1/2 metre, 2 feet or so, something like that. And you can see my wooden frame here, also treated wood, 2x4 as well. Now you can also see my bricks that I've got all the way around, and the reason why I've done this is to keep this wooden frame off of the ground in order to prolong its life, to stop it rotting. And you can see what I've done here. I've fixed the frame, wooden frame, to this post here using this piece of wood here, using some rather long screws. That's solidly down. You want to do that. Now what you can do, this post here was from a previous polytunnel, which was a lot bigger. I actually concreted these in. So you can do that if you want to be really, really secure about how strong the polytunnel is secured to the ground and won't blow away. So you got that there. Any questions you got on that, please feel free to comment and I'll do my best to answer them. So I've got a post like that in each of the four corners. Now this part of the polytunnel I'm standing on actually has a hard standing, some concrete. I could have underneath it, I didn't put that down myself, it was here before I put the polytunnel up. I could have removed it, but I've decided to keep it. You never know, a hard standing can come in very handy. So in the corner over there, and also the corner here, it was actually required that I busted a hole in the concrete. So we'll just move some of this debris out of the way. So I busted a hole like that and sunk the post into it. Now it would have been very tempting to have not bothered doing that and not putting a post in. That would have been the wrong thing to do. That post is in very secure there, and that's what you want to do. Make sure it's secured on all four corners. If you've got a bigger polytunnel, you could also consider maybe putting some additional supports and posts in the middle of the corners in order for some extra strength. So now we'll move on to how the actual polytunnel frame is attached to the wooden frame above the bricks. So you can see here what I've done. I've actually used some cable ties. I really should cut these off. The reason I chose not to do that is because it leaves quite a sharp little bit on the end which you can catch your fingers and your ankles on if you're wearing shorts or whatever, so you want to be careful. And I've got them all around the polytunnel, as you can see over here as well. That way it's really strongly down. There could be other ways of doing it as well. What I have actually seen done is people that have got like little clips that go over like that, and then they're actually screwed to the wooden frame. You could look into doing that if you could get hold of some, or you had some laying about, or you wanted to give it a go that way. But this has been very successful here using these cable ties. So next up, what we've got, which you want to make sure you're regularly checking for, is these, or are these here. Now you can see this one here, really, I need to pull that tight. I'll need two arms to do this, I'm just showing you. You pull that tight like that and connect that to that, tighter than this, and then that holds this cover to the polytunnel frame. Now in my opinion that's not actually enough, and I'll show you how I get round that later on. But you want to make sure you're regularly checking these to make sure they are over the frame, keeping your cover on, like that one there. Even if I pulled that very hard, I might not be able to. Yes, I can. You get the idea of what I'm saying here. Make sure you're regularly checking. Now they're all over the polytunnel. So you can see these skirting boards here. So behind the skirting board is the wooden frame that I showed you earlier. And what I've done, of course, the cover goes underneath onto the ground here. And what I've done is I've screwed this skirting board. Doesn't have to be skirting board. Any wood you got lying about could be good. So something along the lines of battens, that would work. Bit of 2x4, that'd work as well. And that's screwed through there into the wooden frame. So that's holding that very tight. Now, got another one there. and I've got that at regular intervals around the polytunnel. It'd be a very good idea to have it the whole way round. Now, another thing you can do, not possible here because I've got it elevated on 2 courses of bricks. Had to do the 2 courses of bricks in order to level it up. Doesn't have to be perfect with a polytunnel. That's one of the beauties of them. Whereas with a greenhouse, it really does have to be perfectly level. If you can get it perfectly level, that's of course a much better thing to do. But this one isn't. But I've had to make up certain bits of it using 2 courses of bricks. So that's why it didn't leave me enough of this underneath. And of course, I couldn't do it here anyway. But if this was going into soil, dirt, whatever, you know, quite deep down, which if this was straight onto the ground, you'd have a bit more. You can actually then bury this in the ground as an additional thing in order to stop the wind getting under it and ripping it off. So burying that in the ground can be a very good thing to do. I've done that in the past to good effect. Of course, then that does make it harder work in order to replace the cover. But if you can do that as well, that's very, very beneficial. Now this tunnel here went up in March 2017. I've actually got videos when I put it up and it's still intact, same cover. Fixed very similarly to the other one, but with an error, which we'll get into in a moment. I'll show you that so you don't do the same. Now, about a year or so ago, I think it was, it might have been the year before, but I think it was last year, so quite high speed winds, probably about 70 to 80 miles per hour, 113 to about 128 kilometers per hour. That was mentioned on the news. I don't exactly know what it was around here, but it could have potentially been winds like that. It was enough to knock over mature trees, pine trees, and I think it was an oak tree or a chestnut tree. Terrible actually. It went onto someone's garage and smashed it to bits. Very, very sad, and lots of damage was caused. But the winds were strong enough to do damage like that, so certainly strong enough to lift up this tunnel here. But this withstood it, no problem at all. So let's have a look at it and we'll see what's going on. So I'll bring this to your attention now. I can actually walk down there in order to replace the cover, which in my opinion is a very wise thing to do. It's also a bit of storage space, but I really need to sort that out. How untidy that is not best gardening practice. I do need to sort that out. But what I'm getting at is you want to make sure that you can get down the side in order to replace the cover, because if it's up against the wall, the fence, whatever, it can be very difficult to do that. So that's one thing see, as the bucket broke, that's one thing I suggest people can do. So what we do is we go in the polytunnel. Now you've really got to sort of bypass how untidy this looks in here. Many of you are aware I've had a little bit of a health challenge lately, so I haven't been able to get in there, but that's over now, and I now will be able to sort this out. So let's go in and have a look. So we look down here and you can see the wooden frame, but what I didn't do was put it on a course of bricks, which I really should have. When I'd put this up and it was finished, I thought, oh no, why did I not do that? Hence why I've done it with all the other polytunnels I've put up since. So once again, on with the cable ties, fixed in basically the same way, and as I stated, this has withstood 7 years of storms, etc. Of course, we don't get them all the time, but you're very much aware when your tunnel's out in one, and you're very glad that you have secured your tunnel correctly. So you want to make sure that your cover is intact. Make sure you're regularly checking for that, because all it needs is a hole which wind can get in, blow in and wreck the whole thing, tear it. You really don't want that. Now, of course, many of you are aware that I've got 2 trees in here, a peach and a nectarine tree. So they're actually touching the top of the tunnel, which again is bad practice. I need to get in there and prune those. The time of year is coming up very soon to prune peach and nectarine trees. So that's what I'll be doing. And all it needs is like a constant rub like that, and then it won't take long to make a hole, and that can of course cause problems with what I described earlier, and leaking as well. You don't want your polytunnel to leak. So regarding many of the materials I used to secure this polytunnel to the ground, that's of course open to interpretation. What have people got available? What is their preference? Maybe there is something better that you could get hold of. For example, so you saw I've used treated wood for the posts and for the frame. Now, some people might be against putting treated wood into an area such as this. Now, I use what I had readily available at the time, but one could maybe consider something such as cedar, which is said to take longer to rot. I think you pay a bit more for it, but it could be a good long-term investment for your polytunnel, so look into that. Regarding the posts, you could maybe look into something such as angle irons, or maybe some galvanised scaffold poles, something like that. So a little bit of thinking, think outside the box, and of course do your own research, because that's very important in my opinion. So a very important point here. Now, I could have actually got this better when I put the cover on of this polytunnel, and that is to make sure it's nice and tight so it doesn't flap about in the wind. So for example, you could see here that even in the relatively light winds today, that's flapping about a bit more than would be ideal. You don't really want it flapping about if you can help it. So what you do is when you put the cover on, ideally have 2 people, 3, 4 if you can get them, and make sure you really pull it tight before you secure it down, whether you're using the method I showed earlier with regards to the battens or the skirting boards, or whether you're burying it in the ground. Get it really tight, tighter than what I've got here, and that would be the best thing to do. So I can actually speak with first-hand experience about having a polytunnel cover that had a rip in it. Well, last year I had many of you saw, I used to have a much bigger polytunnel here, double the size of this one. It covered this whole area, and there was a tear in the cover which I either omitted to deal with and fix. Partly in my mind, there was nothing I could have done anyway, because I think the tear, the fray was too much and it was just waiting to go, but there we are, it's in the past. But even more annoying, I couldn't actually get a new cover for it, so the whole tunnel had to come down, and I put that small one up, which actually, to be honest, has turned out better for the overall aesthetic of the garden. So in a funny sort of way, it was a blessing in disguise, and it was also a good teaching point. It's good to learn from these things. So make sure you regularly check your covers like this, make sure they're intact. Another good thing to do, if you've got the means to do it, maybe would be to get yourself a spare cover in storage in case for whatever reason you can't get a cover again, which is what happened to my previous tunnel. Of course I could have got some clear plastic and covered it with that, but I made the decision to just put up a new tunnel because, as I stated earlier, it's better for the overall aesthetic for the garden. Now, I'd never guarantee that any of the methods I've shown you are foolproof. Some of you might have some better ideas, and I welcome any comments in the comment section of your ideas for securing a polytunnel, how you've secured your polytunnel, etc. You might have your tunnel in a far more open and windy location than this, which may need a little bit more holding to the ground, whatever. But this works here, and I can only go really by what experience I've got from my own tunnels, because I think it's often very good to speak from your own experiences, and of course with the case of YouTube, share them. That's one thing what YouTube is very good for indeed. Okay, I think I've waffled on enough. Hopefully I've covered everything. If I haven't, you can ask me in the comment section below, and let's go in and edit this video. And as always, thank you very much for your time.